I will now invite Adrien Waite, Head of Planning, to advise the panel on the background and context of the decision and its importance to achieving service priorities. Adrien, do you want to?
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Yeah, so the Council adopted its Environment and Climate Strategy, which is a really important document and sets out the strategy the Council intends to take to address climate change. That document has a focus on mitigation and uses a fairly standard methodology from the Department for Business for how to calculate the trajectory for climate change. And the action plan associated with it sought to ensure that during 2021, a supplementary planning document was prepared to incentivise developers to build zero carbon buildings and reduce water demand. Now, the preparation of an SPD is a process that takes a degree of time. It needs to be underpinned by adopted planning policies, which will come about through the borough local plan, which is in the process of working, and it needs to be backed up by evidence and involves consultation, etc. And the plan is, as has already been stated, to do all of that work and prepare an SPD, which will introduce a document with a greater level of weight than this document will ever have. But in recognition of the urgency of the situation and the fact that we had declared a climate emergency but had no up-to-date guidance to tell developers or members of the public what we were seeking in the planning system from people, we felt it was appropriate to introduce an updated guidance note to provide this guidance so that officers have something to ask for to secure a step change, developers know what we're looking for, and members of the public can see that we are doing something. And in that light, the position statement is not something that can or intends to introduce new policies. It is simply something that's attempting to provide an interpretation and guidance on how we wish to see our existing policies and strategies applied. And it would form a material consideration. So the intention really is to do a full SPD, to have the policy from the BLP, but we want to get a step change in what developers are doing now, and that's why we've introduced this document to provide guidance. The policy, the document seeks to ensure that we get a 20% uplift in reductions in CO2 on developments as an absolute minimum, with an objective of having buildings being zero carbon, which is the maximum we can do in line with the MPPF and the MPPG. It clearly sets out how we wish to see developments achieve zero carbon in accordance with the methodology and the climate strategy. And it seeks to do many other things that the climate strategy wants. It doesn't seek to address every single aspect of climate change because it can't. The policy context isn't there at this stage to do that. It seeks to do the best we can at this time with our existing policies and to start seeing positive change. And that's why officers have put it forward. The type of document that it is would very often, a guidance interpretation document, be something that might be drafted by officers and published without any form of adoption or consultation. We do it on a regular basis with smaller matters such as guidance notes for waste storage provision and things like that. However, this is an important issue and we felt to give it weight for the public and for developers to know how serious it was, we would send it to Cabinet for approval. I'm happy to answer any questions from overview and scrutiny tonight. And that's all I wish to say. Thank you.
Do you want to answer the questions, please? Thank you.
Yes, I'll try and go through them. So we're starting from Councillor Baldwin's questions, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Councillor Baldwin's first question was about the adoption of the borough local plan what difference it makes, whether it's before, after, or indeed if the borough local plan isn't adopted. So the planning system in the UK works on the basis of statute and the primacy of the development plan. So we adopt policies through the development plan, and then additional policies and documents through development plan documents such as supplementary planning documents. And then the third thing in the hierarchy is things which are other material considerations. So as everyone in the room will be aware, at current we have a very old borough local plan, which was adopted many, many years ago and doesn't even mention climate change, never mind have a policy relating to climate change, which we can say addressing is a requirement of the development plan. So the borough local plan does contain a policy. So having a policy in an adopted development plan will significantly increase the weight that we can put on things, particularly at appeal. And after the borough local plan is adopted, we would have that. If the borough local plan doesn't get adopted, obviously we wouldn't have that, and there would be a further delay while work had to be done to prepare a new borough local plan to try and get adopted, and everyone will know just how much work and time is associated in that process. So really it's a matter of weight of documents, weight of considerations, and the fact that the proper way to introduce new policy requirements is through a borough local plan and development plan documents. And this document is simply seeking to clarify our interpretation of other material considerations in the form of national planning policy, changes to climate legislation, and our own climate emergency, which is something we can put significantly less weight on. So I hope that clarifies on that question. I think if I take the second and third points from Councillor Baldwin, we're really responding to Councillor Hazler, but if I just take them in the generic sense of the issue about losing at appeal, I don't think of this as an issue about losing at appeal. It's about doing what you're legally allowed to do within the framework of planning legislation and planning policy, and making sure that the council is trying to do things correctly and not trying to overstretch. And there's a degree we can go to. So for example, the minimum requirement in this document would be a 20% improvement in building regs. And there's very clear guidance in the MPPG that that's the maximum we can seek. So for residential, so if we adopt this document with up to 20%, then the likelihood is that the majority of developers will simply seek to comply with it. If we seek to adopt something with a standard above 20%, which is clearly inconsistent with the MPPG, then the likelihood is that the majority of developers will not simply go along with what we're asking them to do. So it's trying to balance the outcomes we can achieve and secure the best possible outcomes for the borough. And we also have to make sure we're legal in other senses. So if I talk to a couple of other points that linking to some of the comments from the climate group, there was a talk about a climate tax and trying to introduce a climate tax. Well, the only way we can secure funding through the planning system is through the utilisation of Section 106 or SIL. And there's very clear rules about what we can do on that. So we can only through Section 106 secure funding which is clearly and demonstrably linked to mitigating the harm of developments. We can't seek to impose a level of cost that would harm or penalise a developer. So we have to be very careful about how we calculate any offset contributions that come about to make sure that we don't fall foul of that. And some other points, as I've said, we have to make sure that this links to our existing strategy. So I have to be able to underpin what this document is seeking on the methodology for calculating our climate footprint and the trajectory which is set out in the climate strategy. And it would be difficult, for example, to try and seek that construction and demolition was included in that based on the definition in the climate strategy. Other boroughs are in different positions. Every borough has its own unique borough local plan, its own unique status in the process it's got through adoption with that. Many boroughs have more up-to-date borough local plans than us and different policy requirements, but I can't advise you on what other borough local plans do. I can only advise you on what the current policy context within the Royal Borough of Windsor and Maidenhead is and how far we can push things. So I think that's Councillor Baldwin's questions answered. The next question was, when it does go out, how do we let residents know that it's gone out? Well, there's a number of ways we can secure that. The intention is obviously that the position statement and an appropriate web page will be put in place as soon as we know that the document is actually adopted. So that will happen fairly quickly if this panel chooses to adopt the document or it is formally adopted. We can do things like work with the comms team to provide updates in all the usual manner we would use to communicate any new position that we were adopting as a council. Councillor Davies' questions. I believe I've probably already covered the questions about, well, in many ways, hopefully I've already covered the questions about fear of challenge, how far we can push things, and what other councils can do. In terms of the consultation and it, would it not have been polite to ask their view? Well, I think this all comes down to, we as officers are doing the absolute best we can. We cannot possibly, on every occasion, ask everyone's opinion about everything. In this case, we are really looking to try and interpret existing policy and not introduce new policy. And therefore, there is a very legalistic and professional assessment about how far we can push things within the envelope of that policy, which we were seeking to find the balance of in this position statement. And whereas when we do the full SPD, we will obviously consult, and I think that will be a meaningful consultation because there will be opportunities to contribute and shape what it says. I think in this circumstance, the opportunity to shape it was so limited by the confines of what the document was trying to do that it probably would have been an exercise that wasn't that helpful. Although, I will take on board perhaps our communication with the groups about what we were doing, could have been better. We can always improve and we can always learn from things. So I can take that comment on board and we can seek to do better. In terms of when will the SPD be done? I mean, the commitment in the climate strategy is that it would be prepared within 2021. And that is very much the intention. We intend to resource and prepare that SPD within 2021. So that's the timescale we're looking at for that. And the other 2 points about electric vehicles and high-speed internet connection. Well, I mean, those points are simply about trying to address things as best we can. So there will be a large uptake in electric cars in the future, and I think it's only sensible to try and ensure that new developments provide adequate infrastructure for that uptake. It may not be the only technology that comes forward, but it certainly will increase. And in terms of high-speed internet, I think that home working, as we've all seen, can massively reduce people's need to travel, and having adequate internet infrastructure is one of the things that facilitates that. So it's not a position that's in this position statement alone. It's recommended by many other national organisations. the Energy Hub guidance that's referred to in the document itself recommends high-speed internet connection. So it's nothing to do with the council having any relationships with anyone. It is simply a matter that it seems a sensible thing that's good practice to try and ensure new developments have that infrastructure in place. I don't, hopefully I haven't missed any questions, but I'm sure people will let me know if I have.
Thank you, Adrien. Thank you.
Chairman, I think we should probably take Councillor Baldwin next, because he's a panel member, and I know Councillor Wisdom, Councillor Del Costa, you have got your hand raised. I am aware of that, so I'll bring you in straight after Councillor Baldwin.